Hey YouTube, David Star 500 here. Well, I've had my first 2 weeks of school. Got only around 30-something more to go. However, gentlemen and ladies of YouTube, going back to school usually involves the acquirement of a lot of new books. And that gave me the idea, hey, why don't I give a list of my top 10 favorite books? Well, I got the list down to 13 and decided to take my a certain 3 out of there as honorable mentions, and so I am just going to go now into my top 10 favorite books plus the honorable mentions, and I'm just going to go right down to it. And so, here we go. Alright, so number 10 on my list is the book Black by Ted Dekker. If you don't know what that story is, it's the first book of a series called the Circles series, and it's also connected with a number of other of Dekker's works, which is part of his broader collection known as the Books of History Chronicles, and includes a number of standalone novels and a couple other series, including the Lost Books and the Paradise novels. Black, however, was the first story of all of these, and in my opinion, of every book he's written since either in the Circle series or even in the whole Books of History Chronicles, Black was, in my opinion, by far the best. And the first 3 I prefer more than the others. Now, some people may disagree with me on that, and I think one thing that attracts people to the other books rather than Black itself is, ironically, the first 3 books, Black, Red, and White, are the least dark of all of Ted Dekker's works. Now, Ted, as a Christian author, noting that he is the only Christian author who, that is to say, the only book that was a specifically Christian book which made it to my list was Black by Ted Dekker. Now, there are other books in my list written by Christians, but most of them were written at a time when the Christian genre did not exist. This is the only book in that genre which I have chosen, and it's because it's very good. Now, just like all his works, it's dark, but it's not as dark as his later ones. The story, however, it has a very interesting premise, namely, a man by the name of Thomas Hunter falls unconscious in this world, wakes up in this other world, and then realizes that every time he falls asleep in that world, he wakes up in this one, and every time he falls asleep in this one, he wakes up in that one. Very interesting plot to begin. And then he later finds out that that other world is actually this world, in a very different future. And I'm not going to spoil it too much. You should read it. It's an excellent story. Understand that there's Christianity in it. It is based on that point of view, but it's not hard-handed at all. It's just an allegory, ultimately, or maybe something you might call it in the vein of C.S. Lewis's works, namely, if God existed in another world, or if, that is to say, of course God would exist, if there was another world, how would God act in it, and what would be the parallels of creation, salvation, redemption that would happen in that world? And that's what these stories are. Parallels, yes. Parallels is the first word, best word. Black is a parallel of redemption. It's basically a story related to the fall of man in Other Earth. And it's also, back on this Earth, it's more of an interesting, how are we going to stop the apocalypse style story. So at the one, it's the beginning of the corruption in the beginning, and the other is an apocalyptic tale almost. So it's very interesting. It's 10 on my list. I don't like it as much as some of the others. However, it's certainly a good read. You should check it out. That's Black by Ted Dekker, and that's number 10. So number 9 on my list is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. This story makes my list because A, it was the first major chapter book I ever read, B, first classic I ever read, and C, I've read it many, many times, and D, I love love, love Long John Silver so much. That character is really cool. And I think it is Long John Silver which really attracts people to the story of Treasure Island. It's one of the first stories I ever read, that has an anti-hero. This character who, while he's a bad guy, becomes attached to a child who is a good guy. And he's confused. Is it more important to get the treasure he's after and honor his, Puritan side? But at the same time, he has these compassionate feelings for a child. And it confuses and it makes him a very complex character. And you never even know whether he's fully changed one way or another. He was the first of that kind of character I've ever read about. Very common in modern novels, but never as well done, in my opinion, as Long John Silver. And, I don't know, it made me attached to the anti-hero in stories for years to come. My favorite character was always the anti-hero as a child. And Long John Silver was the perfect anti-hero. And so that is why Treasure Island definitely makes the list. Alright, so the next story in my list is written by one of my favorite modern authors. She is not a writer of adult works. Who cares? Yes, she's a writer for children and young adult stuff. I don't care. She's awesome at it. And she deserves to be on this list not once but twice, and she is. Here's my first mention of her, though. Her name is Margaret Peterson Haddix, and she has written so many great books, and the one that I've listed here as number 8 is her story Running Out of Time. This was her first kind of young adult thriller novel, and it's one of my favorites. The basic story premise is this, that a girl is living in the 1830s or 40s, or 20s, one of those, and she's living in this western town, but she discovers that it's not really the 1830s, that it's actually the 90s, the 1990s, that is. And she's living in this little tourist attraction, where people are living like it is in the early 1800s, so that people can sit by and see what life was really like. She didn't know that, and the little children think they're really in the 1800s. Now, originally they were supposed to find out the truth when they got older, but something's been changing. Why? For some reason, also, things are happening that are very strange. She happens to be the daughter of the nurse, and when she was younger, she remembers how sometimes the doctor would prescribe a medicine which obviously wouldn't work, an early 1800s remedy for something, but then he would, she would just see her slip some other kinds of pills under the table, and that would actually heal the disease. But now, that's not happening anymore. Now they're relying entirely on 1800s medicine, and people are dying. What's going on? Also, she finds out, why are they being kept more like prisoners than free people in this tourist attraction? Is it only a tourist attraction? Who can tell? You'll have to read it and find out, and I recommend read Running Out of Time by Margaret Peterson Haddix. You will love it. It is great. I didn't know if I would be willing to put this book in here, but whatever I have to say about it, whatever my feelings about it, as it concerns my religious beliefs, my moral beliefs, it doesn't change the fact that this is one of the best young adult novels ever written, and it certainly deserves a place on my top 10 list, and I've also enjoyed it so much. It's The House of Hades by Rick Riordan. It's in his Heroes of Olympus series, which altogether I found inferior to the series of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. That being said, The House of Hades is by far one of the best books I've ever read. I loved the plot. If you don't know the plot, it's basically The Greek gods really exist, and they're still having kids with mortals, and these mortals are always having to face some Greek or Roman adversary who's trying to overthrow the Roman gods or Greek gods. And in this story, in particularly, sons of or children of the gods' Greek aspects and the children of the gods' Roman aspects are having to unite, because the Greek and Roman gods were the same, and yet they weren't really the same. It's very confusing, but if you read the story, you'll get it. But the House of Hades includes some of the deepest scenes I've ever seen. It also, one thing I loved about it is, in the first series, all these things happen, and then you're like, oh, cool, cool, and Percy Jackson wins, and yay! But in the House of Hades, you're sent to Tartarus, or Percy Jackson and Annabeth are, and they find out that for everything they ever did, there were consequences. Not to mention the idea that there is, for every action, an equal and opposite reaction. That's what this story is largely about, namely, what do our actions do to people? And the decisions we make, their consequences. And it's such a good theme, and that's the theme of the whole story, and I loved it. I loved it. Now, the controversial thing, of course, is that we find out that one character is a homosexual in the story. Now, for some people, just the idea that you would put this in a young adult novel is ridiculous anyway, especially one that's largely geared to people in 5th or 6th grade, and to Christians like myself, we find it, well, rather annoying, simply because it is our religious conviction that homosexuality is wrong. Having said that, it came to mind one day that I'm already reading about a series of heathen gods committing adultery and bestiality left and right, and the adventures thereof. So, going that one step further, while it really drives home the point we're talking about non-Christians, it does, however, it brings home the point, and yet, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if I'm a little hypocritical on the issue, reading all that other stuff and saying, oh, that's fine, but yet the one issue which maybe I wouldn't be my problem is the one sin which I wouldn't usually be falling to. All those other sins, you know, maybe, but the one that I wouldn't be falling to is the one I criticize? I don't know. However, I do believe that Christians should be wary, Christian parents should be wary of that character, and if they're trying to make sure their children have a Christian view on morality of that sort of thing, they might want to withhold the House of Hades until a child is older, so that they can grasp that, yes, the book says this is alright, but we know in our heads it's not. Still, the House of Hades is one of the best books I've ever read. I didn't write it. But it's one of the best books I've ever read. It's got a great lesson on the consequences of actions, and it's got lots of action in itself. Greek mythology, it's cool. Read it, but understand that little caveat.